So I am Catherine McGinnis, and I'm the co-chair of the PEI Steering Committee, and I love that we've been doing a lot of things across borders with our other colleagues in Atlantic Canada, and today is one of those events. We've asked Scott Ferris to come in and talk to us about communicating with plain language, and as many of you heard when you signed on, Scott has been doing some work with Veterans Affairs, and he's also a public affairs officer with the Royal Canadian Navy Reserves. I've known Scott for, he's had 30 years experience, and I've had the pleasure of knowing him all these years. He has extensive experience in marketing, communications, business development across government, the private sector, and educational institutions. For the past several months, Scott has been leading staff at VAC through training on a recently developed VAC Style guide. The guide highlights how the use of grammar, plain language, and accessibility can improve client services. So Scott has graciously agreed to deliver a modified session for us. I know the VAC Style guide session, I think, was 2 hours, and this is modified for all of us outside, not necessarily with VAC. And it'll give us a better sense of how to use plain language ourselves and potentially take some of these things away with us and incorporate them into what we're doing with our departments. So this session is going to be in English only, but we do encourage you to use the language of your choice. Cette session sera offerte en anglais seulement. N'hésitez pas à poser des questions dans la langue officielle de votre choix. I will ask you to please use the chat in Teams for questions. Scott has said he can take them throughout the session, or he will have time, or we hope he will have time at the end for sessions. I would ask you as well to make sure your mic is muted now to avoid any interruptions and any feedback. And I did want to remind, or tell everyone, I should say, that we are going to record this session. So that's for your information as well. So that's that. I still talk as fast as ever, huh, Scott? So great. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bonjour tout le monde. C'est un vrai plaisir pour moi d'être ici avec vous. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. Really appreciate the opportunity. As Catherine mentioned, yeah, I've been a contract worker with Veterans Affairs over the past number of months in the Strategic Communications Division. And as you can see by my dress today, I'm also a Public Affairs Officer with the Navy, currently attached with HMCS Queen Charlotte. And yeah, today what we're going to cover is I'm going to give you an introduction to the Veterans Affairs Canada Style Guide, but really it's an introduction to the use of plain language and the considerations of using language when we're talking to specific audiences. And although this is going to be very VAC focused, you will see there's a lot of things that come out in the presentation today that you'll probably be able to apply in all of your real world situations, regardless of the department that you work in. So it's going to be an interactive session. Like I said, as Catherine mentioned, anytime you have questions, fire them away in the chat. If you see something that you have a question about or concern with, want to raise a comment on, just please know that you're more than welcome to do that. And the Veterans Affairs Canada Style Guide is a document that the department created enabling employees to understand how important the use of language is and why there need to be some sort of guidelines and some rules around the use of language. As you can imagine, within Veterans Affairs Canada, they've got a pretty broad range of audiences, like most government departments, quite frankly. And we'll touch on that in the presentation. But because of that range of audience, and because part of it's pretty specific, being veterans themselves or veterans and their families, the need to be able to communicate with those folks in ways in which they're going to readily understand, in ways they're familiar with from their previous military experience or their experience within the RCMP, for instance, whatever their veteran, existence might have given them. When you can talk to them in the ways in which they're familiar, you really engage directly with them and you get a better response from them. You will, of course, be speaking to them in ways in which, it's easy for them to find information, easy for them to understand information, and then, of course, most importantly, easy for them to use the information that you're providing. And of course, that's a two-way street. So getting feedback from them because you spoke to them in ways in which they're familiar becomes that much easier. As you can imagine, one of the biggest concerns is really making sure we don't alienate any of our audiences. And we can really do that through the use of incorrect language or inappropriate language or language that people just aren't familiar with. So that's the main reason why that style guide was created. To be honest, it flows from the Canadian style guide. And if any of you are familiar with that sort of, I call it sort of the motherhood document around using language, particularly the English language. It talks about, the proper use of grammar, sentence structure, formatting, how to present dates, numbers, all of that sort of detail around the presentation of language. The VAC style guide flows from that. And there's some similarities for sure, but because of the nature of Veterans Affairs Canada's audience, it's a little bit more particular to those individuals. So we'll show you some examples of what that means through being veteran-centric and writing for that veteran audience, communicating, not just writing, I should say, but communicating for that veteran audience. We'll talk about some plain language requirements as well, accessibility, as we touched on. And of course, we'll leave lots of time for questions and answers. But like I mentioned, anytime, of course, you've got questions during the presentation, feel free to jump in and make a comment for sure. As I mentioned, the style guide itself, and in Veterans Affairs case particularly, the department recognizes that the needs of veterans is at the heart of everything that we do. And I'll put on my Veterans Affairs hat in saying that. So our communications, writing, conversations, emails, phone calls, documents we create, really anything that gets produced within the department needs to reflect that priority as well. And it's important to realize that everyone within the department, all of us are involved in creating communications products and activities in some way. It's not just about being strictly involved in a communications division or being part of the communications team that requires you to think about the use of language. All of us, as I say, whether we create emails, documents, phone calls, letters that may get posted online eventually, these sorts of things, we all create these kind of communications products. And so we need to keep our language in mind whenever we are doing exactly that. The approach to having, a defined understanding of the requirements and the use of language within a department, especially within Veterans Affairs, really does help position the department as the trusted source for all communications on veterans and their activities. And really, sorry, Mike.
Capital N.
Okay. So really, like I say, the importance around this is to recognize if we can make veterans and their situations the subjects of our sentences and shift the focus from the department to veterans and their families and their situations, we really have switched that focus to show they are the most important aspect of what it is we do as a department. And that style guide really does. It lays out those principles and methods that anyone within the department can follow to communicate with veterans and their families. Now, the work within the style guide itself and the creation of the style guide, it does flow from a lot of work and a lot of time and experience, of course, with all of those audiences. But like I mentioned, it's really important to notice it's not just for those big C, communications folks within our mandated divisions who create these products. It is something that all staff within Veterans Affairs Canada. And in fact, we also provided the sessions to individuals working within the Office of the Veterans Ombudsman, within the Veterans Review and Appeal Board as well, so that they too could have that similar shared understanding. So that's how it comes about. And what the style guide really does, of course, is reinforce the department's mandate to support the well-being of veterans and their families, and to promote recognition and remembrance of the achievements and sacrifices of those who served Canada in times of war, in times of military conflict, and also in peace times. And so, of course, with that specific audience in mind, being able to communicate should also be equally specific, as I mentioned, because when we have a defined departmental style that's precise and consistent across all platforms, and we'll touch on this, the requirement to, of course, recognize communicating through different channels can also carry some messaging with it. When we've got that defined style we understand we're consistent across all those platforms, then of course we really do increase our credibility. We enhance our authority regarding the information we're sharing. And most importantly, it makes the department and our communications much worthier of trust in the eyes of veterans and their families. In fact, it could honestly be argued that it also improves services to veterans and their families. Because again, they're going to be able to find the information quickly. They're going to be able to understand the information we share with them. And of course, they'll be able to use it to their benefit. And ultimately, that's what we're really trying to get across. Now, I have to say, one of the things that's really important in this aspect, because this question would come up a lot when we were doing these presentations. When you're talking about language, an awful lot of concern comes up that all you're doing is really, it's just spin. You know, it's that PR magic that you're trying to put on things. You're trying to make the department look good. You're trying to, you know, make sure the audiences are happy, and you're always just trying to say the right things, right? Well, look, nothing could be further from the truth. And I say this from, you know, a few perspectives. First of all, as a staff person at Veterans Affairs Canada, we have a responsibility to communicate to our audiences in ways in which they're going to understand. And if they came up through a system within the Canadian Armed Forces or the RCMP, even, you know, if they were the member or the family member, there's ways in which, as I've said, they're used to being communicated with. And if we can do that, that improves their understanding, that improves our engagement with them, and improves our interaction with them as well, then we have a responsibility to do that. And I'm going to show you, you know, some key examples of this in the use of language, and you'll really see, you know, how this resonates. But I also say it. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, it's Loran. Sorry, Scott. Okay. I have this style guide, the complete 22-page style guide up on my screen. I don't know if that would be helpful because I still don't have the presentation.
Yeah, we were just saying, Mike and I were just saying that maybe your firewall is blocking things. But I mean, whether you use Loren's style guide or speak to us and we send the style guide out later, because I'm catching a lot from just what you're presenting to us. So I think whichever you find is more efficient for you.
Yeah, we can certainly share the presentation after the fact for sure. There's probably some, you know, quite honestly, you will probably capture most of what I'm trying to say, because the slides, quite honestly, just enhance the content that I'm going to be talking about. So we should be quite good, to be honest with you.
Okay, and someone, initials BR, said I'm enjoying the chat with the PowerPoint, but I think they meant without. They'll clarify for us, but I do want to say that, oh, she meant without, yes, or he, sorry. So you know what, this is working for, I hope it's working for others. And again, for those who are visual, we will get the deck out afterwards. So why don't we just continue?
Sure. Okay, Catherine. And again, folks, my sincere apologies here with this. But yeah, like I say, when we've got, you know, when you realize the responsibility that we have to communicate with people in ways in which they'll understand, we also have that responsibility to communicate with people, you know, because they're individuals, in ways in which we ourselves would want to be communicated with. And that is, you know, it's not a fundamental human right, but it almost should be. Because when we have a lot of gobbledygook, when we have a lot of legalese, when we have complicated information coming at people, and let's face it, you know, government departments can be complicated. We work in dynamic environments. We have a lot of programs, services, benefits that we provide for our clients. And so those things, when they change, of course, we have to be able to communicate with them. Hey, there we go.
It did come in, so you can tell me what page you want to move to.
Yep, for sure. So
sorry about that.
Let's be on slide 5, Catherine.
All right.
The VAC Style Guide will help us. Just before this one.
Okay.
Right there. Yep, perfect. So yeah, as I say, you know, in terms of building that authority and credibility and trust, we're communicating with people in ways in which they want to be communicated with, in ways in which, you know, they're used to being communicated with. And like I say, it's not spin when we do that, we're doing it because we have, and I can't emphasize it enough, we have that responsibility. And it just reinforces our connection with our audiences that much stronger. So when we say things, and we may use, you know, slight military terminology when we say things, and you'll see some examples of these. You know, when we communicate with them and the format of our letters takes a certain format, for instance, it's something they're familiar with. And so they respect that. And that's a big part of communicating with people as well, is communicating in ways in which, you know, you will earn their respect. It just makes it that much more meaningful. And it's not, it takes it way beyond the level of spin. And like I say, you'll really see this in some of the examples that we're talking about shortly too. Next slide there, Catherine. So just a quick recap, and Catherine, you'll have to hit the space bar here to advance the slide. The last button on here is employees. So if you want to just fast forward to the last one there, that's great. This was just a quick recap of all of the audiences within Veterans Affairs, and it gives you a really good example of just how broad that can be. And I'm sure regardless of what department you work in, you probably have as equally broad an audience. But what's really key here, of course, is to recognize, and this is not a numerical list, the employees, we ourselves, are just as important a part of the communications and the rationale behind having a style guide and the use of plain language as any other part of our audiences, because we too need to be communicated with. Changes within our departments, projects, programs, services, benefits that we all work on, we too need to be able to understand these. And so making sure that we're an essential part of our audience and we understand that and we get it is also equally a fundamental part of the use of plain language. Okay, next slide. So what does it mean then when we talk about putting veterans at the center of our communications? And this is really the essence of what the Veterans Affairs Canada Style Guide comes to. We know veterans and their situations are at the heart of everything we do. So of course, we make them the subjects of our sentences, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. If you can just advance on there, yeah, absolutely, Catherine. Assuming a clear, confident voice is absolutely important. Being honest and humble and serious, without question. But two fundamental points here, being as inclusive as possible is really huge, especially in this day and age. And inclusivity in the VAC Style Guide world, which may be similar within your own departments, includes not only making things accessible for those with disabilities, any type of disabilities, but of course also it will touch on the gender issue as well. Now, we don't have the opportunity to touch on that particular piece within the presentation today. In fact, even within the VAC Style Guide, the presentation and the training around gender is actually being developed as we speak. But being inclusive is a big part of things. And of course, as I mentioned too, using the first person and second person, talking to people in ways in which they want to be spoken with, you know, to saying you and we, and, you know, rather than talking about the department or veterans, you know, this kind of thing. It makes the conversation that much more personal when we use personal pronouns, you know, so hence the name. So let's look at a couple of examples. So Catherine, next slide. So this first one here, to show you what we mean by something that's department centric. Here in this example, you see this is the definition of who Veterans Affairs Canada considers to be a veteran. And it is any former member of the Canadian Armed Forces or the RCMP actually, who releases with an honorable discharge and who successfully underwent basic training. So what we mean by being department centric here is that, of course, right off the bat, the department is, you know, the first thing that's mentioned. And so we're positioning the department as this is who we think should be considered a veteran. Now, the other thing here too is we're not really speaking to them as people. We're calling them former members. Now, I fully realize as a currently serving member within the Naval Reserve, I realize the use of the word member is very much a thing within the Canadian Armed Forces and even the RCMP for sure. But there are ways that we can change this to be quite a lot more personal in our approach with this kind of thing. And you see this on the next slide, Catherine. So here, we immediately shift the focus from the department, Veterans Affairs Canada, to veterans themselves. And we call them people. Veterans are people who completed basic training in the Canadian Armed Forces, or RCMP, and released with an honorable discharge. And you can see it's just that small, slight change makes it that much more personal. We are talking to them as people, and we are making them the subject of our sentences. So you can see just how a slight change like that can make such a huge difference. So next slide, Catherine. So in this particular example too, what we've got, and here I want to show you this because we're not necessarily talking about, you know, people per se. We're talking about a toll-free phone number that we're trying to share information on, but to a pretty specific part of the veteran audience. And that part is the LGBTQ2+ community. But you really have to read through this to get to the understanding of what we're trying to share across. And so again, you can see, contact the department at this phone number if these situations apply to you. You know, if you've got service-related injuries, there may be benefits that, you know, the department can provide. Again, very department-centric. Next slide, Catherine. So you can see here how just subtle changes in the use of our language. If you are a veteran and you identify as LGBTQ2, and we should say LGBTQ2+, you may qualify for specific benefits related to your services. We want to make sure you receive these benefits. Let's talk. Now, I'm putting the emphasis there on the we and the you know, just to bring the attention to it. But you can see how the use of those personal pronouns just makes this so much more personal. And it's such a much better approach, much more engaging. And of course, the call to action is very clearly directed to the people that we're trying to get that action from. So next slide. So what are we trying to do here? And again, Catherine, they're perfect. I'll ask you to hit that one more time. So what we're trying to do, again, remember, is shifting the focus from the department to the audience that we're speaking to. Yes, we're formal and we're positive, of course. That's part of what we need to be. We have to be serious, of course. But of course, we're also recognizing the needs of our target audience, and writing in that first and second person can be very important. Being mindful of the needs of our target audience, we're going to touch on this a little bit later in the presentation too, but keep in mind, even yourself, when you get communications or you get information, just like this presentation right now, you want it to be impactful. You want it to be meaningful. I'm doing it to be, you know, informative or transactional. You're trying to get information or you're trying to get something done. You know, think about this in other communications you've received. Maybe it's your home insurance policy is getting updated. Well, you know, do you fully read through that every time it comes through? No, we scan things, and we're going to touch on this a little bit later, because I want to find the important information. Yeah, okay, what's my premium? Did it go up? Did it go down? Am I still covered for the same things? You know, same thing when our cell phones get upgraded, for instance, and, you know, the operating system gets an upgrade. We have to read through all of those terms of service agreement. No, we don't do that. We scroll through them and go, yep, accept, and the phone updates and we move on. Be mindful of the needs of your target audience. Don't be needful of your target audience. Be mindful of the needs of your target audience and help them get stuff done, but make them the focus of what you're trying to do. And again, you'll see in these next few slides coming up how you know, we've got some examples of how impactful this can be. Next slide, please, Catherine. So here, to show you that this also applies across multiple channels. And this is important, especially in this day and age, because we do have so many channels of communication: social media, letters, websites, emails, phone calls, you know, all these different channels. And you know, they all have different meaning. or can bring different meaning, I should say, when we use them. Something like a tweet, for instance, short bursts of information meant to be, either insightful or entertaining perhaps, but practical, nonetheless. And here in this example, we show where this came out last year, in July last year, from the department through the Bureau of Pension Advocates, who were continuing to conduct departmental reviews and wanted veterans to be reminded that they could still send in their claims and they would be processed. But it came out like this: we are continuing to accept and conduct departmental reviews. The Bureau of Pension Advocates continues to make progress in digitizing review claims, which will help improve the time for processing these claims. This says nothing to veterans themselves who are waiting on claims or who want to know, are you still accepting my claim? Should I still be sending it in? So let's look at the next slide. And here, right away, your claims for benefits remain a priority even during COVID. We are making progress. So again, those first and second person personal pronouns, we're making progress. Please continue to send in your claims. We'll process them efficiently and quickly to get you the eligible benefits you need. Again, not spin. We're talking to our audience. We're talking to them in ways in which we respect their time. We respect they have concerns. We respect that they want to know, can I still send in my claims? But we're also sharing, the information. Yeah, we're making progress, speeding up the claims, and we're getting the information out to you as best we can. But even in a tweet, we can see how we can make the use of our language very impactful for sure. Okay, next slide. So again, just a quick summary. What works in a tweet doesn't always work in speech. When you think about it, when you get a letter in the mail these days, it's kind of formal, right? It imparts a whole different type of meaning. Now, let's forget all the spam mail we might get, for sure. But when you do get a letter in the mail, it is, oh, this must be important. I should pay attention to it. So when we think of, the old Marshall McLuhan quote, the medium is the message, that really is very impactful these days, for sure, perhaps more so than ever. Texts, casual, short bursts of information shared between two friends. A departmental letter, a departmental memo, a briefing note, for instance. Again, formal information carries with it its own messaging. So we just need to make sure we do that. And that is how the VAC style guide, or any style guide in particular, and the use of language can really ensure that we are being practical, using the right channel to send the right message. And of course, consistency plays a huge role in this, making sure that what you're saying is consistent, has been checked against what's been said about a subject in the past. Because again, remember, ours are very dynamic departments, I think regardless of what department you're in, and things can change quickly. It never hurts to check back on what's been said in the past. Okay, next slide, Catherine. Within Veterans Affairs Canada too, and around the use of plain language, there were, and this is really where time and experience taught us a lot, there were certain terms that kept coming up that caused a lot of frustration with our audiences, really even to the point of alienating them. And so, of course, it's one of those lessons learned for sure, but this is something that's now very important and is incorporated as a very key part of the style guide within Veterans Affairs. And that is pointing out certain terms, certain words, phrases to avoid. So let's take a look at a couple of those, because you probably have some of these in your own departments too. Let's look at the first one, and it's the word civilian. Well, as you can imagine, military personnel, RCMP personnel, when they retire, they don't consider themselves, we touched on this already, they're members, they're former members. When we say something to them like, this program will help you to transition to civilian life, it rubs them the wrong way a little bit. And it can, even to the point of alienating them for sure. Because they're not transitioning to a civilian life. They're transitioning to a life after service, or a post-service life. And so that's one example that the style guide points out of how we can, again, from a point of showing respect, from a point of speaking to an audience in terms in which they're used to. This is, every time a military member or an RCMP member gets ready to retire, they go through a post-service transition period. And that's what it's called. So let's do the same thing and use the language they're used to. It's just respectful. Next slide, Catherine. This one, the use of the word eligible, and this was a real challenge within the Department of Veterans Affairs because that department creates things called eligibility benefits and eligibility benefit letters. And these letters are form letters, they're templated letters. Now, what was happening with the use of the word eligible, and you'll think we're splitting hairs here, but the difference is this. The use of the word eligible, in its pure definition, it implies that an individual has a right to something. If you're eligible for something, you have a right to that thing. Whereas what the style guide recommended was the use of the word qualify, because qualify suggests that someone is entitled to a benefit or service or entitled to something if they meet certain conditions. So as opposed to having a right to something, the use of the word qualify means, yes, you may be entitled to it if you meet certain conditions. And again, this kept coming up in a lot of different areas because, again, people would see this word, well, I'm eligible for it, so I get it automatically. And again, of course, we just have to be careful because it implies a right versus a qualification if you meet certain conditions. And again, I agree with you 100% if you're sitting there scratching your head going, yeah, Scott, now you're really getting into that spin realm. But you'll see, I think, particularly with the next one, where we really do have some strong differences here. And the word eligible, like I mentioned, was just causing some slight challenges, in fact, quite a few. When the shift was made to using the word qualify, there was a better understanding, a better ability for the department and the department's clients to understand, oh, okay, I'll qualify for it if the following conditions are met or if the following situations exist. Next slide, Catherine. Now, this word, particularly within the military community, the RCMP community, the veteran community in general, and veteran families, for instance, too, it extended to there as well. The use of the word help comes with a lot of baggage because those members, military members, RCMP members, their families, they're proud people, they're confident people, they're independent people, and throughout their training, throughout their lives, they're brought up to think, I've got to be able to solve this. I have to do this myself. I know even in my own service, for instance, it happened a few times in my early career. If I came upon a group of sailors and I saw them and I said, hey, can I help you guys with something? Their immediate reaction would be to look at me and say, no, I don't need your help. We had a great example within Veterans Affairs Canada where there's a position called a Veteran Services Officer. And this position, the person who was in this position, told us a story about how they assist some of their clients setting up what's called their VAC account. So using a website to set up an account to receive services and to apply for, I should say, and receive services and benefits through Veterans Affairs. Now, it's a bit complicated. You have to go through, any of us who have set up an account on a website know it can be a bit complicated. Websites are all different, the forms look different, so on and so forth. What this person started doing, instead of saying, oh, yes, I can help you set up your account, yes, I can help you, walk through the website and I can help you, so on and so forth. What this veteran service officer started doing was using the word train. I can train you to use that website. I can train you to walk through how to navigate the website. I can train you to apply for the benefits you're looking for. And again, the simple use of changing one word from help to train, and the reaction was instantaneous. The reaction was so positive because with a military member, you say train, oh, okay, just a second. Okay, yeah, I've got my notepad and my pen. Absolutely. Okay, I'm ready. You're going to train me. And I'm going to retain the information you're giving me because it's training. The style guide itself talks about the use of the word useful or targeted, relevant as well as different words to use as opposed to help. And again, you can really see how in this instance, and this is the strongest one I can give you, it's not PR spin. You're talking to people in ways in which it's going to be impactful for them and they'll take something away from it. Okay, next one. This one, the use of the word option, this was interesting because what was happening within Veterans Affairs were sentences very much like the first one you see here. Canadian veterans are offered a wide range of options through Veterans Affairs Canada benefits and services. And it ends. It's like saying to somebody, yep, you've got a bunch of options. And you turn around and you walk away. We just needed to finish the sentence. So, of course, trying to be specific with the use of the word options. And where possible, try to be specific to the individual. Your circumstances, show us you have 3 options. Here they are, A, B, and C. So you can see that example. Next slide. This particular phrase too, thank you for your service. The style guide, again, through time and experience, it was recognized that this is a phrase that just requires, the application of some good judgment. Absolutely, veterans currently serving personnel, they hold a special place in our hearts, for sure. We see veterans on parade and we want to thank them. It's a wonderful thing to do. But what's happening within the department, and this is an area that's currently being addressed, it's like anything, it's going to take some time to make these corrections. But what was happening is these eligibility benefit letters I spoke of earlier, some of them would be going out to clients and advising them that they didn't qualify for certain benefits. So there was some bad news they were getting. And then on the next hand, the letter said, but thank you for your service. And so we just needed to be a little bit careful. We need to recognize, again, we're alienating our audience by saying thank you for your service, and we're telling them you don't qualify for something. The two thoughts they conflicted. And so, like I say, we just need to give that some special attention. Next slide too, Catherine. And these words as well, care, compassion, and respect. What we need to be careful of here with the use of these words is overusing them to the point where, as the slide says here, they sort of become a tagline, where we've used them so much that they just don't hold any meaning anymore. And so we have to be careful about that. And it's easy enough to do because we can demonstrate care, compassion, and respect in the services and the benefits we provide, but also in our personal interactions with clients too. Okay, next slide. So this was an example of one of the exercises that we put into our presentation. It is something to show you how all of the things we've talked about so far can be seen in a particular passage of text. And what you'll see in this particular passage are things like we're being department-centric, we're not specifically talking to our audience, we are using words that we need to be careful to avoid, for instance, and those things are, and we even used words here, and this is not something necessarily mentioned in the style guide, but something that was picked up as important. Using the words proudly and using the words carefully was also flagged as, that's maybe not the right place to use those kind of words. It's Veterans Affairs Canada's job to provide targeted services benefits. It's our job to provide those programs that are well designed. So even using those kind of words was quite a flag. But you can see we've got help there, we've got civilian life there. It's very department centric. And if you go to the next slide, Catherine, you can see how we can take, what also is much longer text and really tighten it up, make it much more easier to understand. If you're a current or former member of the CAF or RCMP or a family member of a veteran, you may qualify for services and benefits to support your life after service. So much easier to understand. And you can see just how impactful that can be as well. Okay, next slide. This piece on plain language, we'll zip through this fairly quickly because I'm conscious of our time and want to make sure if you have any questions, we can answer them too. So I'll ask you to go to the next slide, Catherine. But really what we want to see is the use of plain language, making sure that things are clear, concise, and direct. And there's 3 bulleted points on this slide, Catherine. So if you want to pull up the other 2, here you can see some examples of things that are not plain language. The first one, of course, looks kind of complicated because there's all these hads in it. But if you read it, it actually, makes sense. The second one, of course, well, that has to do with pronunciation. I might look at that sentence and see it a certain way. You're going to look at it and see it a different way. Read rhymes with lead, and red rhymes with lead. but read and lead don't rhyme, and neither do red and lead. So pronunciation, even in our communications, can have an impact. And then the last one, well, our dear friends at the Canada Revenue Agency, and I definitely don't mean to pick on them. I was recently helping a friend complete their taxes who this person had received this particular benefit. And I came across this. What you see there is one sentence. You know, thankfully, there's a couple of commas in there so we can take a breath. But you can see that this clearly is not plain language. It's complicated, it's hard to read, and plain language seeks to avoid exactly that. So next slide. This is what we mean by plain language. Being able to make sure you can be understood. Being clear, being concise, being practical and engaging. Because remember, most importantly, and think about this, you yourself, when you get information, you want to be able to find information easily, you want to be able to understand it, and you want to be able to use it. That's the most important thing that we're trying to get across in our understanding. And it's important, particularly in the Canadian context. In 2018, a survey by an organization called ABC Life Literacy Canada found that 48% of adult Canadians have literacy skills that fall below a high school level. Now that's challenging. That's English language speakers understanding English language. It's not a second language issue or anything like that. It is a huge issue within Canada for sure. So we need to be able to keep our audience in mind and be able to write for them in ways in which they're going to be able to understand. Because again, remember, we're talking about government departments who create some pretty complicated programs and services and benefits by times. So if we can be as clear, as concise, as practical and engaging as we can with them, with the information, I should say, that we need to share, then that's what's important. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not naive to the fact that, of course, there are those legal departments that are going to have to write to a certain level. There are always different audiences we write to that require us writing to different levels. That's absolutely the case. It's always going to happen. All we ask around plain language is we keep those audiences in mind. Yes, you need to write to your audience, but just make sure you're doing exactly that. Think of it this way. If you were working on a project within your department, you had a small team of people together, you're working away for a few weeks, of course your use of language is going to get to a level that's pretty high and specific to that project. You'll talk in acronyms, jargon, buzzwords, for instance, for sure, that you will all understand. But now let's say you have to explain that project across the department or across other departments. Of course, you can understand how your use of language is going to have to change, because not everybody's going to understand what the DSAFD means or the PQRLO means. You know, you're going to have to explain those things and walk people through what the project means and what the program means for them so they can get it. That's what plain language is all about. There's a few tools that we're going to show you on these next few slides, and you'll get the links to these when you get a copy of the presentation. The links are there. So this is just a recap of the survey that I spoke to with regards to 48% of Canadians having low literacy skills. So we want to make sure our audience understands. So here's some tools. Here's the next slide, Catherine. This one, Hemingway Editor, a great tool to be able to cut and paste information into. It's not a secure site, so if you're dealing with protected or any information that requires security around it, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But this is a great tool to help you with, understanding at what level your language may be at. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide, this particular passage came out at a grade 8 level, and anywhere within that grade 7 to grade 10 level is going to be a range that's very understood across a broad spectrum of people. So that's a good tool to keep in mind. Some of you probably use Grammarly as well, a very similar tool for sure. Next slide. Termium, Termium Plus is the Government of Canada's linguistic database. If you ever come across a program you don't understand, an acronym, you're looking for, abbreviations, definitions for things, this is a fantastic website. I use it quite regularly, both in my civilian world and in the working world. So it's a great tool to have, a database like this. And then the next slide there, this is, I mentioned off the top, the Canadian Style Guide. This is the Canadian Style Guide online. And it is a fantastic site when, you need to understand grammar, punctuation, spelling, as you can see, any other difficulties with the English language. The Canadian Style Guide is your go-to for that, for sure. Okay, we'll just got a couple more slides and then we can stop and take a quick break for questions too. But this one is huge. Getting to the point is really fundamental. We've all been in those presentations, maybe you're thinking this one's exactly the same, where the speaker's just droning on for too long, or there's too much information on the page. I'm not understanding it. I used to struggle with this in the early days of my career. I used to always believe if I said more, if I put more on the page or put more on the screen these days, that it was more impactful, it was more meaningful, and nothing could be farther from the truth. When we get to the point, it shows we have a strong command of our subject. It shows we have a strong understanding of what it is we're trying to say, and we don't need to be verbose. We don't need a lot of words to say what we need to say. We can get our point across, respects our audience, and of course, most importantly, in terms of putting the important information up front, that's what we're doing. And I won't emphasize it enough. It is far more impactful when we can say everything we need to in as few words as possible. And you've seen that in some of the examples that we've shown you so far of how we can, using plain language, change things around to do exactly that. I'll show you a couple of examples right here on this last slide, and then we'll wrap up for questions. Here, getting to the point, you can see in the first example, to assist in defining in particular instances whether the quality of life has been severely impacted, the legislation lays out deeming circumstances in 8 subparagraphs. Well, that's some great legalese for sure. But as you can tell, what's important is that there's 8 legislative provisions deal with the situation on the severity of impact of quality of life. So let's say that. Let's just do exactly that. This next example, the last one, and Catherine, I'll get you to hit the spacebar one more time. Right here too. All persons from senior management to all levels of staff. Who are we talking about? We're talking about everybody. So just say it. Everybody must do their part to ensure a safe and healthy work environment. It is honestly just that simple. So I'm respectful of our time. There were a couple of more slides that you'll see in the presentation. What I will do as a quick summary for those other slides, they really speak to a couple of key areas. Using the active voice, so not speaking passively, not speaking in the past tense so much, but being active and proactive in our use of language. And also careful considerations around acronyms, jargon, and buzzwords. We all know, we all see it every day. Acronyms and our own jargon, the buzzwords within our departments, they're never going to go away. They'll always be there. But what we have to do, again, keeping our audiences in mind, is recognize that we're using them and trying to explain them as clearly as we possibly can. For instance, acronyms particularly. If you take nothing away from this presentation, I would ask you to do this. Every time you use an acronym for the first time, spell it out fully and include the abbreviation, the acronym, in brackets immediately after it. Whether that's in a document, whether that's in a presentation, whether it's in a letter that you may be creating, if you say it on a phone call, it just helps your audience with their understanding. We must provide at least some legacy that people can go back to and go, oh, okay, that's what that means. Because I haven't seen one yet. There isn't a glossary or a dictionary of all government acronyms. If anybody knows of one, I'd love for you to share it. But we just need to be, again, being respectful of our audience, know that we need to spell those things out. And the last piece on accessibility, again, it comes down to creating our products so that our audiences can use them. Screen readers, alt text for images, for instance. There is something called the Digital Toolkit and that the federal government has available to us as staff. It's a simple, easy document to read, provides very clear instructions on how to create Word documents or PowerPoint presentations to make them accessible. If I can do it, and I did it for the presentation that you just saw, trust me, anybody can do it. We just need to know we have those tools available to us. So in a quick summary, speak in plain language, get to the point, make sure your audience can find your information, can understand your information, can use your information, and know that when you're doing those things, you're not just creating PR spin, you're being respectful, you're talking to people in ways in which they want to be spoken with. And I guarantee you, the results have shown it from the impact of the VAC Style Guide. I guarantee you, you will have much more effective communications and you'll get a much better response from your audience. So I thank you for your time. I realize we're close to the hour, but Catherine, I turn it back to you and we can answer any questions that may come up as well.
Scott, I just want to say thank you so much. There were some comments in the chat as you were speaking. People you could see were just taking away like almost aha moments, like tweaking one word and the incredible value of that. And you know, one of the big things taken away for me was the, you know, building authority, credibility, and trust, and especially the trust that just for our clients who can be in situations that are difficult, not just Veterans Affairs, but other departments, can just give them a sense of peace when they're contacting us, when they're dealing with us. We really contribute to their well-being just in doing that. Unfortunately, we do like to keep to the time, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask people if they have questions, they could send them to, what I'll do perhaps, I did ask you earlier if you'd be open to, you'd be okay with if we shared your email?
Absolutely.
So we'll share that. People are saying, thanks so much, they have to run. I wouldn't be surprised if we asked you to come back and do this again. I'm putting you on the spot right now. Because it was just really fantastic. You know, it was interesting when you showed the page there talking about grade 8 readability. I don't know if people are aware that our newspapers, journalists are trained to write at a grade 8 level. So, you know, it's something to keep in mind. Just all the comments you made about the communicating with people and making sure to build that trust and how we do that. It is 11 o'clock. If anyone has, I will say, if anyone has a burning question, they can't wait for Scott's email, I will open it. But I think you may be getting some questions via email, and I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to get you back to do this. I will ask people attending if they have other colleagues that they think might be interested, let us know. And like I said, the demand is there. We'll invite Scott back. This is the kind of thing I think people leave and mention to other people, and then other people say, I wish I had attended that. So thank you so much, Scott, on behalf of everybody in the NMC Atlantic. So glad to have you do this for us.
My pleasure, Catherine. I was honored to be asked, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, have a great rest of your day, and everybody else enjoy the rest of your day too, and we'll see you all again soon.
Okay. Bye for now, Catherine.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I thought I'd just stick on for a minute, Scott. That was great.
Yeah, sure. No, my pleasure.
Yeah.
There's lots of fun you can have with some of the exercises that we did, Catherine, too. So, you know, if they're being able to show people on the accessibility side of things, how to make Word or PowerPoint documents accessible.
You know,
a practical exercise too.
Yeah, I'm thinking that we definitely could. I think we could have you back for this because what was I going to mention? Maybe, I don't know if it would probably be in the fall because we're getting into summer, but everything you talked about has always been such a passionate, important thing for me. Probably because of my communications background, but also just because of some of the work I've done with people with mental illness and also people with intellectual disabilities, and just seeing how the importance, incredible importance of speaking to people in language that they are familiar with, that they understand, that doesn't make them feel like they're being talked down to, that makes them feel respected. And it's such a passionate thing for me. So I think we could very well see a lot of interest in this, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, listen, take care.
Yeah, you too. Always
Oh, congratulations. I don't know if Lorraine sent you that email. I'll forward it too, so you have it to see the email regarding the recognition.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm honored for sure. Again, thanks so much.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.